Welcome to Beyond the Blacktop podcast, where we dive into all things off-highway vehicles in California. I am Kevin Schmidt, along with Paul Hart.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm happy to be here.
As well as on the episode today, we have Don Schmidt.
Yeah, happy to be here too. Nice to see you guys.
So, just before we get started, since this is the first episode of this podcast, I figured we should be introducing ourselves, the podcast, and just how Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division, or OHMVR Division, was started. So, my name is Kevin. I work with the Interpretation and Education Division within Off-Highway Vehicles. My job is to promote safety while people are out riding, making sure that people have all the information that they need for places to go, things to do, stuff like that. Paul, what do you do for OHMVR Division?
I work for the OHV Grants Division, oversee grants, work with grantees, overseeing their project, make sure they stay on track with spending their funds correctly.
And Don?
I'm kind of the jack of all trades at the division. I work primarily underneath the interpretation and education part, but I'm also heavily involved with OHV safety and other special projects that come up from time to time.
All right. Really quickly, because I know Paul went riding over the weekend. What'd you go do? What'd you go see?
Well, me and the wife went over to Mount Patterson area. Not sure if you guys have ever been there, but it's beautiful. You can actually ride OHVs all the way up above 11,000 feet. So it's pretty incredible. It's on the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest. Part of that forest is in California. We had a great time. The mountain range is in the Sweetwater Mountains. Really rocky and high elevation, so some good training for my racing for sure.
Yeah, that sounds a little tough.
Yeah, I would think so. Where's the trailhead for that?
Multiple trailheads. It's like most national forests, there's a lot of forest roads that could get you to the trail to the top, and that's kind of what we did. We rode around, did about 200 miles over the weekend, and came back happy.
All right.
Sounds fun.
Sweet. A little bit about the podcast. The goal of this podcast is kind of twofold. One, we wanted to speak with the off-highway vehicle users in California a little bit more directly, as well as a little bit more casually. I think a lot of what we do when working for the state and for the government tends to come off a little bit stale and dry.
Yeah, sometimes it does.
And so our goal here is to give you something that's both entertaining but also informative to help people better understand what we do, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. So we're trying to promote safety, places to go ride, off-highway vehicle events, things that might impact off-highway vehicle recreation in the state, all of that kind of stuff, and highlight both past, present, and future off-highway vehicle recreation in California on public lands.
Yeah, a lot of people that might listen to this podcast may have seen us at a variety of different events because we try and touch base with all the corners of California.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a little bit more unique format to hook up with everybody. So.
Yeah. For right now, I believe the podcast is going to be coming out about once a month, hopefully on the last Friday of each month. Today, we are currently recording it on September 3rd at around noon. So that is what all the information is up to date to. So if you hear anything by the time this is released that is contrary to what we're saying here, that might be why. Just keep that in mind. So we are going to get into our first segment, Dishing on the Dirt. This is all about off-highway vehicle news in California, and we are going to start with the post-fire recovery at Hungry Valley. As a lot of you may have heard, we lost about half of one of our SVRAs
that's horrible.
Down south near Gorman, just north of, I guess, the LA metro area.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. About halfway between Los Angeles and Bakersfield.
Right by the Grapevine.
Yep. And the fire itself was about 15,000 acres in size. About 10,000 of those acres were inside the park. Some news to be aware of regarding this fire in the park. 19 trails and the special event area were hit by the fire. All the campgrounds, however, were saved, and a lot of the auxiliary buildings and things like that were saved. Most of what was burned were signs, fencing, and kind of I think there was like a pump house burned.
Yeah, that a minor piece of infrastructure, but most of the infrastructure there at the park, all the park housing and the maintenance stuff and the office and all that kind of stuff, they were able to save that. They saved the Honey Valley special events area, which was great. So it really kind of went down the eastern half of the park from north to south. And there was a lot of fencing in that area that they lost, all that peeler core that was holding up the fencing. So
Yeah.
that was the worst part of it. And the fact that they lost so much vegetation that was holding that real sandy soil in place.
Yep, that's going to take a lot of work to get all that back in order.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're now in the park repairing all the dozer lines that got cut for the fire as we speak. They're also starting on their erosion control measures, trying to keep the trails from completely washing out. They're not going to open up the park all at once, however. They're going to open it up in pieces. So it sounds like the southern area of the park is going to go first, and then the northern section of the park, and then they're going to finish with the Freeman Canyon Wash because it's the steepest terrain, it's the most heavily impacted by the fire, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's the area that's more susceptible to erosion from rains and snow and whatnot. So
Yeah, so a little bit more work has to be put in there. So when they first reopen, they're probably only going to be day use. Camping won't be allowed for a little bit. But once the park is fully back open again, you'll be able to go there and camp and ride just like you were able to in the past. And now we're going to pass it over to Paul as he gives us some event and race info.
Yeah, it's not all inclusive, but I do have some pretty major events and races. I'm going to go from like the north to the south. And with racing in California, there's different districts. For those who aren't aware, it's the American Motorcycle Association is a sanctioning body. They have District 36, District 37, and District 38. So whenever I say that, that's what it means. So in D36 in Northern California, October 5th and 6th, we have a hare scrambles in Marysville at MMX. 10/13, we have a sprint enduro at Metcalf Motorcycle Park in Santa Clara. On October 19th, on the Mendocino National Forest, we have the Jackhammer Enduro. And on 10/27, we have the Cowbell Enduro again on the Mendocino National Forest. So that's all Northern California events. Those are all motorcycle-only events. As we move south, we start having some ATVs and UTV races as well. So for D37 in Central California, we have round 5 of the Sprint Enduro Series at Wagon Wheel, Spangler Hills OHV area. That's a motorcycle-only event. On October 12th, we have dual European scrambles at Teagle Wash. That race is going to be open to ATVs and motorcycles. Next, we have the Blythe Grand Prix. That's a national. That's going to be October 25th and 26th. ATVs and MCs are going to be racing there. Now we're going to move on down to District 38 in Southern California. October 5th, we have the Rattlesnake Chase at Placer City East. That's an MC and an ATV race. On October 26th, we have the Monster Mash. That's a hare and hound ATV and motorcycle race, along with UTVs racing separately from those bikes and quads. Additional events that we have throughout California include some youth events. We have the Youth Motomania at Fox Raceway. That's a very famous raceway. That's going to be October 11th through the 13th, and that's in Pala, California. Next, we have the California 300. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be all types of OHVs. We have trophy trucks, cars, ATVs, motorcycles, UTVs, you name it. They're going to be there. That's October 2nd through the 6th.
Where's that one taking place?
That's going to be in Barstow.
Barstow.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so that's a big event. Also, the sport likes to give back. So Cal 4-wheel drive is going to have Operation Desert Fun, and that is a fundraising event for paralyzed veterans. So all the proceeds are going to go to paralyzed veterans. That's in Salton City. That's going to be a great event. I believe you have to just sign up for Cal 4-wheel drive to be able to participate. Lastly, for as far as events go, we have something cool at Carnegie. It's the Moto Climb series. And I think, Kevin, you've been to that before.
Oh, yeah.
I used to do some professional type of hill climbing and desert racing, so all this stuff's right at home for me. That's going to be a good one. And we can't forget about the event, the OHV Commission, that's going to happen, meeting at October 23rd and 24th. So if you guys have anything to add about the commission meeting, please do so. But that's about all I have. Those aren't all inclusive. I'm sure there are a few other races out there, but that kind of covers it for the state.
Yeah, they haven't set the agenda yet for the commission meeting. That usually comes out 10 to 15 days before the meeting. And you can always check on the California State Parks OHMVR website when that comes out. And if you are interested in learning a little bit more about the Off-Highway Vehicle Commission, you can always get on a mailing list for that as well. So
It's a good way to get your voice heard.
absolutely. Yep. We hear from a lot of the OHV community during those commission meetings.
Yeah, and you can join both virtually and in person, right?
Yeah, they're going to stick with the hybrid meeting style of presenting, so you don't have to go in person anymore. You can have your voice heard while you're sitting in your living room.
That sounds great. All right. And then I think we have some information about people, or our people in the news section, yeah?
Yeah, I have a little bit of news. It's not great news. It's actually sad news. For those of you who don't know who Dave Pickett was, he was very instrumental for OHV in California. So Dave Pickett was the president of District 36, American Motorcycle Association, for over 10 years. He also served as the legislative action officer for D36 until he retired in 2018. His advocacy helped ensure that there were legitimate trails available across the state for those who recreate off-road. He worked very closely with state parks, Forest Service, the BLM, federal, state, local legislatures, and with various coalition business groups that support motorcycle and off-road recreation industry. You guys have any kind words to say about Dave? I know you work with
Absolutely.
him.
Yeah.
He's such a great guy. He's so instrumental for the sport, and it's just sad.
Yeah, amazingly sad news. I think we were all very shocked, at least I was, when I got a text from Don Amador,
Yep.
who's with MIC, and I was incredibly shocked. Dave, I'll never forget when I first met Dave. It was one of the first outreach events that we worked, and Dave came up, and he was such a force of nature in the OHV community. He comes up and shoves his hand into my hand and introduces himself. And the first thing he says, if there's anything you ever need to know about the California OHV community, you just need to ask. And so we spent quite a bit of time at that event talking, and every other event, whether it was a commission meeting or an outreach event that he happened to be at, Hangtown. I mean, he was all over the state. He seemed to participate in just about anything. I always made sure to go over and have a little chat with him. He was a great guy, and just it's a huge loss for the California OHV community.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dave was also a lifetime member of the Blue Ribbon Coalition, the California Enduro Riders Association, and in 2011, Dave was the recipient of the AMA District 36 highest honor, the Jim Holzer Service Award. So, again, I'm very sad news, but Dave did so much for the sport, and yeah.
Thank you for sharing that news, Paul. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So we are now going to head into our main segment today, which is what even is OHMVR division? Who are we? How'd we get started? Why are we even here? Why are we talking to you today? Like a lot of things, it all starts with the internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
The ICE engine. Before 1876 and Nicholas Otto invented it, there were a few other attempts that didn't go as well. But Nicholas Otto in 1876 really creates the internal combustion engine. And then Carl Benz sticks that internal combustion engine in a car.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that first car was a three-wheeler. So
yeah, it was
it came back around in the 70s.
Yeah, it was a three-wheeler. It's was it tiller steered?
Yep.
Yeah, it was tiller steered, so you didn't have a steering wheel. And I think the funniest part is that it was mostly driven by Carl Benz's wife.
Mm-hmm.
He spent not nearly as much time in it as she did. Paul, how far do you think Carl Benz's wife is driving a three-wheeled vehicle?
I mean, a hand steer brake vehicle, probably not very far, but I don't know. Tell me, Kevin.
It's about 65 miles round trip.
That's awesome.
She went to go visit family with the thing over wagon roads.
Maybe
Yeah.
she was trying to get away from Carl.
I mean,
That could have been.
could have been.
She took the kids, put
Yeah.
them in that thing, and went to go visit the relatives.
What I find hilarious is that she also had to help engineer the brakes on the car because seeing as she was the one driving it the most, she wanted the thing to stop, as do most of us with our vehicles at a certain point.
Yeah, always a good thing.
Yeah. Shortly thereafter, people are sticking internal combustion engines in other things, such as motorcycles. The first one being put together by Daimler, Maybach, and Kanestadt. I'm never sure how to pronounce that. Kanestadt. In 1885. You then get Triumph started in 1902, Harley Davidson in 1903, and kind of so on and so forth. You then have it start getting put into other kinds of off-highway vehicles, such as snowmobiles in the 1920s. And really everything back then, if you think about it, was some form of off-roading. They were probably graded flat roads in more urban areas, but for the most part, if you're driving a car, everything was off-roading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there wasn't much. I mean, they were just experimenting with macadam roads. We call it pavement nowadays or asphalt, but back then it was a little bit different mix. And oftentimes in the urban environments, they were stone or brick or something like that. But you didn't have to get far outside of a city before it was all off-roading.
Yeah, and that meant if you were driving a car, it's, in the middle of winter, you're wheeling in mud, and during summer, you are getting dusted out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you think about the first kind of designated transcontinental highway in America, the Lincoln Highway. There was maybe 98% of that was dirt. There was only a very small percentage of that in 1914 that actually had any kind of pavement whatsoever. So,
yeah, I think about those early vehicle races where people would be racing from San Francisco to New York and going over the mountains. They'd spend most of their time just carrying pieces of their vehicle over the mountain rather than driving their vehicle over the mountain.
Yeah, there's a great historical photo along what is now Interstate 80 of them winching a vehicle across the South Yuba River in late spring. So there's snow, and they actually rigged up a rope kind of pulley system across the river, and attached to that was the car. And it was part of the race that they had in the early 1900s, basically from Sacramento up to Lake Tahoe. Yeah, it's just crazy what people would do to try and win a few bucks back then.
Yeah, and, kind of like you said, races were pretty inevitable,
Well, as soon as you have two of anything,
Yep.
it's going to be a race, or at least that's how my brain works.
Well, you think about the motorcycles that were designed, they came from the bicycles from the late 1800s. And as soon as the bicycles were invented, they were having bicycle races. It was inevitable that kind of thing happened. So.
Yeah. My personal favorite early off-roading photo is the guy down at Pismo on that motorcycle that
Absolutely.
he looks buried in the sand.
Yeah.
And you're just wondering how the heck he got that thing out there and how the heck he's going to get it out.
He looks buried, but he looks very happy. I'm looking at the photo right now, and he's got a smile on his face. So, yeah.
Yeah, that seems about right for us.
Yeah.
If it's easy, you don't remember it. So,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of this, like Paul said, once you had two of anything, races were bound to happen, and you start having some kind of fun things happen that are still around today. You get hare scrambles, you get hill climbs. You get some other kind of funny ones, like the LA Motor Dome in 1910. It only lasted 3 years. It was a circular track about 30 feet wide with a 10-foot sand trap on the outside and inside edges, so that way people didn't get killed by the cars flying off the track. It was made of pine wood, so they're not even racing on pavement or on dirt. They're on wooden slats, and it was about a mile in length. And people came out for miles. Thousands of people are coming out to watch these kind of races.
Yeah, and that was pretty common actually across the country, especially back east. They had road races, early road races back then, where spectators would just stand on the shoulders of the roads. And oftentimes, if they had crashes, there were fatalities involved with just the spectators because they were standing so close to the vehicles that were flying by. So, yeah, automotive racing in the early part of the 1900s was huge across the country.
Now, as with a lot of things in American history, this kind of continues on for a little bit until World War II happens. And when World War II happens, there becomes this need for these purpose-built off-highway vehicles that can go anywhere and do anything. And you sort of get two forms of that over the course of the war. You get your Willys Jeep, and you get motorcycles that can go anywhere, do anything, and do it quickly.
Yeah, the motorcycles were particularly popular on the European side. You see a lot of those historic photos of the German soldiers riding motorcycles back then. So.
Yeah, and on the American side, you had the Willys Jeep that became, it still is a symbol of that time. And after the war, you had all these people who got used to driving and riding motorcycles and Jeeps. And there was suddenly a large surplus of them that the Army no longer needed. And so people started buying them. And initially they get used kind of on farms and ranches as, utility devices. They're not necessarily being used for recreation. But it doesn't take very long past that point where more of these people, they have money from having, been in the Army, and they've just come home and they got good jobs, and so they bought these Jeeps for the farm, and then they realized, hey, we can go do stuff with these.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so on the other side of that, you have places like Japan that's trying to build industry back up after the war, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And you have companies like Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, who all start becoming these kind of industrial leaders over there that start building all these motorcycles.
Yeah, Shishiro Honda, he had wanted to build something, and Japan's economy was devastated. The United States was basically running the country at the time, and he was able to gather up pieces and parts from sort of the bombed out industrial centers and basically invented a motorized bicycle and just kept refining it. And it's a very interesting story about how dedicated he was to trying to make a good quality product and give the people of Japan some sort of transportation right after the war.
Yeah. Paul, you ride Hondas, right?
I ride Hondas. Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about these Hondas because I know my dad talked a lot about these early Hondas. He was riding in the 60s, so I mean, everybody had bikes in the 60s, right?
Did he have a Dream? A Honda Dream?
Yeah. I ride a Honda 450X, a newer one, but these old Hondas are still around, and they're still running. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these kind of bikes are, Honda started in 1947. You have Yamaha in 53. You got Kawasaki in 66. I'm not sure when Suzuki entered the fray, but I'm sure it's somewhere right in there.
Don't know.
Yeah. But, all of these companies start to kind of take over the motorcycle market, and especially in the 1960s, things start getting even more purpose-built for off-highway. You don't just have motorcycles coming over from Japan, but you've got U.S. companies like Ford and Chevy and International who start building things like the Bronco and the Blazer and the Scout. All of these other 4x4 vehicles that start getting used. Honda releases their trail series of motorcycles in the late 1960s that become super popular. I mean,
Oh yeah, and don't forget the Manx dune buggies and what people were doing with Volkswagen Bugs. It's amazing how somebody could look at one of those and go, "Hey, we can take that off road," because they became hugely popular to modify.
Yeah, I've been passed by some Volkswagen Bugs down racing in Baja, but that's for another story and maybe
Yeah.
another time.
They might have the Subaru motors in them.
Yeah.
And you can't forget the snowmobiles at the time, too, in the late 50s. Coming out of Canada, Armand Bombardier kind of finally figures out how to work a two-stroke motor into a frame that's not quite a motorcycle and not quite a car, and put a track on it, and made really the first usable snowmobile at that time.
yeah, 1969, Honda releases the first ever three-wheeler,
Yeah.
and we all know how that went.
Have you guys ever ridden a three-wheeler?
No.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
A
I have
lot.
too. Do you have any scars? I'm joking.
You know, frankly, no. I was doing it while employed with California State Parks
Nice.
at Hollister Hills,
Nice.
SVRA. Yeah, we had 2 or 3 of them down there that we actually used for maintenance duty. And one of the first things that we all did was trained on how to properly ride them. And then, of course, when we're out on the dirt and whatnot, we worked on how to have fun with them. So it was kind of a twofold kind of thing where, here's the right way and here's how to make them skid. But I never rolled one, probably because I'm big enough to be able to put the weight over the correct side of the vehicle and make it turn.
Yeah, whenever I was young, riding in the woods behind our house growing up, some of the local neighbor kids had three-wheelers, and if you put the big enough tires, those balloon tires on them, they will float, and they will float across creeks or rivers, but they don't make them anymore.
Yeah. I did ride one at Oceano as well
Nice.
one time, and had a lot of fun with them. But you definitely had to know what to do with them.
Yeah, a little
Yes.
tippy.
Just a little.
Yeah.
With all of this innovation in the 1960s comes some other issues. The big ones being kind of this urban development infringement and the environmental movement. With urban development infringement, all that means is that suburbs are expanding rapidly. Cities are growing much larger, and they're starting to fill spaces that they didn't usually fill that had been getting used for this off-highway vehicle recreation. And so those two things are starting to come into conflict. At the same time, we're starting to become more aware of what is good for our planet and what is not. And so there are some environmental conflicts with all engine-driven vehicles that they were trying to fix at that time as well.
Yeah, there was a lot going on in the middle 60s, late 60s. All that was kind of coming together. The space program was, inviting a lot of people into California for manufacture of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo ships, especially in Southern California, San Diego, all those places that traditionally just outside the city core that had been used for off-highway vehicles. They were building houses on that. So a lot of those races, a lot of the hare scrambles that took place back then, all of those things were being impacted. A lot of the riders back then were sort of pushed into places that they really shouldn't be riding. And you still have the whole idea of environmentalism that started to come into being in the late 60s and early 70s. Should we be riding in some of these places that were, had pretty sensitive environments and might not be the best place to do some of the racing and whatnot. So that really kind of pushed a couple of different legislators in California to figure out how to maybe solve that problem. And it was an amazing piece of legislation that legislator Gene Chappie and Ed Zeeberg put together. Gene was a very enthusiastic Jeeper, and you could often find him in the early and mid-50s up on the Rubicon Trail. And Ed Zeeberg was a pretty avid environmentalist, and he wanted to make sure, and so did Gene, that there were OHV areas available for people to ride in California. Mm-hmm. And then they needed a funding method to make that happen. And this is what's really amazing about this story, because they were able to write legislation. You've got a Jeeper and an environmentalist that put together a piece of legislation that still works for everyone today. And they were able to convince Governor Reagan at the time to sign it, that put forth a funding method for off-road recreation in California, which is to take a little tiny chunk of gas tax. Every time you put fuel in your car, there's a little tiny piece of that goes into the Off-Highway Vehicle Trust Fund. It also created the grants program that Paul is involved with right now, but it created a method to push that money out to start with to our federal partners at the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. And what you don't really hear about a lot, but at the same time, President Nixon back in the early 70s had signed a piece of legislation for federal land that kind of pushed for off-highway vehicle planning. So there's all of this kind of was coming together fairly rapidly right there in the early 70s. And that legislation from 1971 still works for California, still puts out a lot of money into not only the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, but a lot of other different partners that we have. So that's a really great part of that program.
Yeah. So you mentioned the law. What were kind of the first areas in California to be designated off-highway vehicle areas from that?
Yeah, so,
law?
the feds were working on their own bits and pieces of, what would work and what wouldn't work. Of course, they were working off of the federal legislation that they had to sort of blend with the California stuff. In California, initially, we were looking at purchasing properties up and down the state for off-road recreation. And the very first one that we were able to purchase and put to use in 1975 was originally called Pismo Beach State Vehicular Recreation. The name changed pretty quickly to Oceano Dunes in order to separate it out from the non-OHV area. But that was the first one. And then right after that, Hollister came into being about 6 months later. That was an interesting purchase of a large piece of ranch land there in San Benito County, bordering Monterey County. And over the years, we've been able to expand that property fairly significantly. The Hollister property had already been used as an off-road area for quite a while by the gentleman that owned that ranch. So, right away, they were able to make use of that trust fund money within, 4 years of the legislation passing. So that's pretty significant, I think.
So we have land, we have law. Usually that means someone has to be there to take care of those two things. So
Yeah.
when does that start happening?
So they figured out that it was a little difficult to manage all of the money and the property and the staffing and all that kind of stuff. So in the early 80s, Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division was created within California State Parks to kind of manage the grants funding, the state vehicular recreations that were areas that were coming into being, and some of the other things that were happening at the time, and the promotion of developing off-highway vehicle recreation. So it's been part of California State Parks since the early 1980s.
Okay. And about how much, I should say, the gas tax isn't our only funding nowadays,
No.
correct? Yeah.
No, and it never really was. There was, there's been a registration process for off-highway vehicles for a long time. But it was also in the early 80s that the green sticker and then eventually the red sticker fees were set. And a chunk of that money comes into the trust fund. So it's, I think, $54 a year. If I'm not mistaken, the $36 of that actually comes into the trust fund, and then there's about $7 of that goes to DMV to manage the vehicle registration process. There's about $10 of that goes to the Highway Patrol because they actually deal with accident reports and some of the safety stuff, mostly on the federal lands. And so there's a little bits and pieces out of that $54, that $54 registration that goes out to other places. But the majority of it goes into the OHV trust fund.
All right. So we are now going to kind of take a look at what the Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division looks like today. And we're actually going to talk with a couple of different people from within the division, including our Deputy Director, Sarah Miggins. We're going to talk a little bit more to Paul here about grants and cooperative agreements. I'll talk a little bit more about what interpretation and education is doing. And then we'll meet with one of our resource managers. His name is Scott Soares. We're going to talk to some of our administrative staff with Amy Woodhall. And I believe you, Don, are going to be talking a little bit about the law enforcement side of Off-Highway Vehicles Division.
I will. Yep.
So I would like to introduce our Deputy Director, Sarah Miggins. Would you mind introducing yourself as well as what you do here at OHMVR Division?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. So I am the Deputy Director of California State Parks Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division, which we all know is a mouthful to say, so AKA OHMVR Division or program. And we are one of many independent divisions led by deputy directors like myself. There's the Boating and Waterways Commission, State Historical Resources Commission, and State Parks Recreation Commission as well. And a title like Deputy Director that I have may not mean as much to our listeners that don't work in public service or government or bureaucracy, if you will, but I consider a deputy director like a vice president that reports up, most likely sometimes sideways, down. I report to a chief deputy that is like the EVP, an executive vice president, on up to our state parks director. That is like a CEO of a company or a corporation. California State Parks is the largest state park system in the nation, and all of the recreational programs are supported by these divisions and deputies like myself. Our state parks actually welcome approximately 75 million visitors a year. So for comparison, many of you have been to Disneyland, I'm sure. Last I checked, they have somewhere between 14 and 15 million visitors. So we have a very big job here at California State Parks, welcoming all of California and many international visitors from around the world. So as Deputy Director of OHV, I am a statewide leader in recreation and management. The OHV division supports 9 state vehicular recreation areas. You're probably already aware that we call them SVRAs. Some of them have visitor centers, campsites, roads, and trails that run through all kinds of terrain, from the deserts, dunes, and mountains, and we manage a robust environmental compliance program. The OHV Act gives the division certain duties and responsibilities, including the planning, acquisition, development, conservation, and restoration of lands and state vehicular recreation areas, again, SVRAs. The division also implements a really important program, a big program. It's our grant program that annually funds federal agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. And fortunately, just a couple weeks ago, I visited one of our grantees, the Bureau of Land Management, up on the North Coast in the Redwoods, just outside of Arcata, and that's called the Samoa Dunes. And it was awesome to visit with the BLM and see how they've improved those lands that they inherited, restoring and managing a beautiful place on the beach here, and it was just awesome. They also just built a pretty radical and responsible rock crawling area to practice on, which was really cool.
That is a lot of information about what you do, because you do a lot here. What does just an average day look like day to day? What are we doing as deputy director?
Well, thank you. On a day-to-day basis, my primary responsibility, or who I'm accountable for, is the team here in Sacramento, but that also reaches every part of California since it is a statewide position. But what's really important to me is ensuring that all of the employees of the division know that they're valued, that their contributions are valued, and that they have the right tools to succeed and get the work done. And I'm talking about high quality work. I am impressed with everybody I work with here at Division, and it's a real honor to lead this team. And I do that with an open mind and heart. We have several management units. Units, again, to our listeners, you might wonder what that is. It's like an office that make up the division. We've got law enforcement, grants, environmental compliance, administration, and interpretation. And I am accountable, again, to all of these offices, and I really enjoy working with such committed and professional teams.
Well, thank you for that.
That's greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
And I think it should be noted that Sarah is our boss.
Yes,
So, yeah.
she is. She is. Now, with all of that, what is your vision for how state parks, and especially OHMVR, fits into off-highway vehicle recreation going forward here within the state?
So the OHMVR division is in direct alignment with state parks. We're obviously a big part of state parks. And I consider us a vehicle, pun intended, to meeting statewide goals to protect cultural and natural resources for, of course, our future generations of Californians and visitors worldwide. All of us at state parks value, foster partnerships that celebrate all kinds of access to the outdoors with emphasis on both motorized and non-motorized recreation. And we are very interested in expanding partnership development with organizations like California Outdoor Recreation Foundation. In addition, we're interested in expanding our parks by acquiring new lands near park-poor communities in areas that are both urban and rural. And we at the OHMVR division currently are really committed to expanding OHV recreation to meet the goals of legislation that actually was just passed a few years ago. And finally, I just really want to emphasize our commitment to youth and young adults in California, well, anywhere that are interested in park and recreation careers. And that is why we encourage the local conservation corps to apply for grants and welcome those serving in our SVRAs. Currently, we have trail crews at Carnegie, Prairie City, as well as Hungry Valley, a number of our SVRAs where we can see our young folks learning and developing the skills that they need to succeed to take my job.
Yeah. So, well, maybe not take your job, but,
Yeah.
you know.
But it would be wonderful to see any of those folks that we've been working with over the course of the last year or two, become employees with California State Parks. I was really impressed when we first met them out there at Prairie City for that first little thing we did with the San Joaquin group, and it was great to meet them and see. And you mentioned youth programs. We still work pretty closely with a couple of other different youth programs in the state, down in El Centro, and the LAPD program there in Los Angeles. So yeah,
that makes our work even more meaningful to work with the younger generations here in California, and I think that's really motivating for all of us to take care of the land here that makes up the great state of California.
Speaking of taking care of the land, are we going to see you down at Hungry Valley on the 28th?
You bet.
All
I'll
right.
be there with my gloves on.
All right.
I
Sweet.
can't wait.
Awesome.
Awesome. Love
Yeah.
to hear it. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about what Grants does and what cooperative agreements might do within division here?
Absolutely. It's a little bit long-winded, but I'll be brief.
Okay.
The grants program awards state funds to federal, local, and nonprofit agencies to aid their budgets to keep off-highway vehicle riding areas open in California. This money is used to maintain and build trails, educate the public about OHV education and safety, provide OHV law enforcement, and protect the environment. The funds come from the Green Sticker Fund, which is collected from gas tax and OHV registrations, as Don had mentioned. Agencies that want funding must fill out an application and score their projects. The OHV grants team then reviews those scores and adjusts them if the application doesn't support the claims. After that, the projects are ranked from highest to lowest until all the money is given out. After funding is awarded, the grants team works with the agencies to issue contracts and make sure the projects are completed and planned as the funds are to be used correctly. So that's kind of what the Grants and Cooperative Agreement Program does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that kind of impact the OHV community, the people who are actually out using the trails?
It impacts it greatly in a very positive way. I've ridden all over the state. I worked with the Forest Service previous to state parks, receiving these grant funds to maintain and keep trails open. 2 national forests in California maintained and managed over about 600 miles of OHV trails, and it helps keep trails open from down trees in the forested areas, sign replacement, law enforcement out there on the ground, and then like in the desert, there's going to be a lot of like major erosion issues from rain ruts and things of that nature. So yeah, it really does fund all these OHV areas that are open to the public in California, more so than most people would probably think. It's pretty impressive, yeah.
I have a fun fact for you.
Okay.
Do you know how much money, grant money, has been issued since the inception of the program in the early, it's 1974 when they finally got it off the ground?
$1 billion?
You're close. Kevin?
I don't know, 750 million.
Very close. Over $800 million has been put toward off-highway vehicle recreation in California since 1974 through the Grants and Cooperative Agreement Program. So that's pretty significant.
That's so awesome. And
Such a huge chunk of
Yeah.
change.
such a huge chunk of change. And it also goes to developing new trails. And just from my little piece of the pie, I was able to add about 40 miles of new OHV trails on the Tahoe National Forest with my previous career. So that all comes from these grants. It's so important that you get your registration. Yeah, go
So-
out there and help out.
So how do those other agencies, like you said, that you worked with, like the Forest Service, make sure that they're using that money in the places where it's needed most?
Well, from me, like firsthand experience, after the snow would melt, I would go out on my motorcycle and I'd literally ride every trail that was out there and start doing kind of a maintenance plan for the year. Additionally, with our program, there are some environmental requirements. You have to do a soils conservation plan, and Scott Soares will talk about that a bit later. But we rate trails green, yellow, red, and trails that are heavily eroded or have some major issue are going to be fixed first. So that's from like the grantee's perspective. And then from my perspective now, being a grant administrator, I'm helping oversee how that money's being used, going up and kind of doing like compliance rides, for lack of a better term, to see, hey, we're going to fix these 50 miles of trail. Did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, maybe this actually over here is worse because I rode your whole system. You may have missed it. So we're all working together. But the idea is to keep these trails open and in nice working order and not causing any more damage to the environment.
Yeah, and it's not always just paid employees with those agencies that are working on those trails. Oftentimes they're using volunteers because they have to meet a match when they apply for their grant, and they're oftentimes using different volunteer groups to make that happen. So it's a great part of the
Absolutely.
program.
It's a huge part of the program. I worked with multiple volunteer groups for years, and like it's a basketball term. I say, hey, you're the 6th person on the team.
Yeah.
And they really were. They did so much work helping out Jeep trails, motorcycle trails, ATV trails, you name it. Volunteers are key to this program, absolutely.
Awesome. So that's going to bring us over to you, Don, with law enforcement. What is law enforcement's role within the off-highway vehicles division?
Yeah, so it's kind of split a little bit because we were just talking about the grants program, and one of the portions of that program is law enforcement grants that go out to a very approximate 80 agencies around California. Most of that grant money that goes to law enforcement goes to the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, mostly because they have about 80% of the off-highway vehicle areas in California.
Mhm.
So they get a big chunk of that funding that's available. And, whether you're on federal land or if you're at one of the state vehicular recreation areas where we have our state park peace officer rangers, they're there for your safety. They are, sometimes looking for violations, but more often than not, and this is a little bit different than maybe what you might see in your own cities or towns in the way law enforcement does traffic, a lot of those peace officers that are out there are looking to see that you have safety equipment, and they might stop you, not for the citation, but to ask you about that. Maybe they notice somebody in your party that's not wearing a helmet, or maybe is wearing a helmet, but a wrong type, or it's not
Like
buckled or something.
like a bike helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with kids. We see kids in ROVs and side-by-sides that, even the UTVs, that might have a quote-unquote helmet, but it's a bike helmet, or, it's something kind of funky.
It's not a DOT helmet. It's not
It's not an
snap.
off-roading helmet.
Not off-road,
Yeah. So oftentimes those officers will stop just to make the safety contact, not necessarily for the citation. In fact, the ratio is probably somewhere around 80 to 1, 100 to 1 when it comes to those types of safety stops as opposed to citations. But they also do deal with law enforcement issues. Drunk driving is a real problem whether you're on a city street or in an off-road area. There's a lot of people that think that it's legal to consume alcohol and then jump on a bike or get in side by side and go have some fun. They also, oftentimes will find people drinking while they're driving out there. So that, because it's a major part of what happens in some of the accidents that we have at the OHV areas, that's something that they're looking for all the time. We have about 80 state park peace officer rangers within our state vehicular recreation areas. I have no idea what the federal number is, but we're running at about 80 people, more or less, out there trying to keep the public safe.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of leads me into my portion of what I do here with the Off-Highway Vehicles Division. I work in the Interpretation and Education Outreach and Safety Program. And our job really is to try and give people the information that they need to learn how to ride or drive their vehicles safely. So a lot of our interpreters, people who are out helping the public make sure that they're staying safe, they will be teaching riding classes. You might see them out at Prairie City teaching people how to ride ATVs, side-by-sides, motorcycles, things like that. You'll see us traveling around the state to different events, going and teaching kids the correct way to drive off-road, teaching things like the tread lightly principles, how to stay on trail, what kinds of things you want to drive on versus not. You might see us showing kids how to properly buckle a helmet, all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of our role, is kind of that frontline education aspect before it then gets into the side-by-side.
And don't forget, we spend a lot of time talking to people about the environmental side of things.
Yeah.
Because a big part of what the Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division is supposed to do is to try and balance that part of environmental compliance and management with providing off-highway vehicle recreation. So we spend a lot of time with our wildlife kit at those events.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time with our wildlife kit, teaching people about their local flora and fauna.
Yeah.
Or just, the animals they see outside the vehicles as they're riding past.
What's the most popular thing at the wildlife station?
It's almost always the bobcat or mountain lion or bear.
Right.
Not the skunk.
Well,
Stinky is always very popular, but we also put out their representative scat.
Yes, the rubber scat.
That's a very popular thing with everybody who comes up to the booth.
Yes, it is. So, all right. So we are now here with one of our resource managers with the Off-Highway Vehicles Department, Scott Soares. Scott, would you mind kind of introducing yourself and what you do here at Division?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Scott Soares. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division, and my main function is to supervise the environmental compliance unit here at the division. And, we can get into it a little more, but predominantly our role is to ensure environmental compliance throughout all aspects of the program.
Okay. So when you're at work for Division, how is what you are doing affecting the off-highway vehicle community?
Yeah, so that's a That's a really good question, and they can, this role can often seem kind of at odds with what the environmental community has envisioned for what we do. But what I like to tell people is that a lot of my job revolves around ensuring that we can continue to do and offer the highest quality off-highway vehicle recreation in the state. And it's impactful and beneficial work in that a lot of what we do ensures that those nice places that people enjoy recreating at, and the facilities that they enjoy, and the beauty of it, the intrinsic beauty of it, remain that way for future generations to come and for future OHV opportunities. And that's really what we strive to do, is ensure that the environmental regulations, laws, requirements of our program are met, so that these nice places that we enjoy recreating, these beautiful places throughout all of California, not just the state vehicular recreation areas, remain beautiful for future generations to enjoy.
That sounds great. So you're really just trying to help minimize the impact from the off-highway vehicle use that's happening, to make sure that these areas of California continue to stay as beautiful as they are.
Yeah, that's correct. There's no denying that there is a certain level of intensity with off-highway vehicle recreation, and some of those impacts, for lack of a better word, are important to try to offset to the best of our ability. And so we really want to reduce the impact to sensitive species, sensitive habitats, things of that nature, to ensure that we're not having an impact that would be detrimental to the environment overall, or to reduce the enjoyment of others that are trying to use these areas too.
Well, that goes right back to the original legislation from 71, where we
That's
are
right.
required to balance off-road recreation with environmental concerns. That's part of why we're here and what we have to do.
That's exactly it. And it's in our mission as well. I'm strongly driven by that, trying to strike that sense of a balance, right? To providing high quality OHV recreation, but also trying to balance the impacts of it, and try to restore areas that had unmanaged riding, or prior to management, that had impacts that were associated with the recreation. And so I really strive to push that with our team, and to help understand that our job's not a job of adversarial position, but more of a place to balance, and to try to create a sense of, like, let's problem solve some of these issues that are out there, and try to come to a space where everyone's satisfied, where we've satisfied our environmental requirements, we're doing a good job, we feel good about that, but also that we've worked with the people that are on the ground doing the work, and trying to help them get a kind of a lift, right? We're all trying to lift the same boat. So in my opinion, it's all about striking that balance, and realizing that we're here to support this recreation long term, and to try to do that in the best way possible.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of people here at Division, you're also a user of these resources. You're not just, someone who is here, being an environmental scientist. You still go out and ride, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. I've been on two wheels in the dirt for a long time. I grew up spending a lot of time just outdoors in general, right? From camping, car camping, backpacking, things of that nature with my family growing up, but also dirt biking, traveling throughout the state to go ride different areas. And so I have a particular connection with it, right? I like to kind of say that I can understand both sides of the equation, so to speak. I approach a lot of problems that I see in my day-to-day work from a user's perspective, and I try to instill that same perspective into the staff that I work with, and others that I interact with. Is try to bring that user group perspective to the problems that we're trying to address. And I think that has led to a certain level of success, and definitely an understanding with the community. When I try to work with them on an issue, it's easier to communicate when you can look someone in the eye and tell them, hey, I ride too, and I understand what's going on here. I get the land management aspect of it, and I get the user group perspective as well.
Yeah, definitely. With all that in mind, what is one thing that you would want the off-highway vehicle community to know really about what you do, to take away from your little piece of the puzzle here at OHMVR Division?
Yeah, sure. We're all working to do the same thing, right? We're all trying to make sure that this recreation keeps going. But if you read the tea leaves, so to speak, things with changing climate and just areas being encroached upon by development, things of that nature, I think it draws an even finer line underneath it that it's more important now than ever to ensure that the program is fully compliant with all of our environmental regulations, so that when or if the time is called, we can say with a straight face, like, yes, we feel good about the work we're doing out there. We stand behind it, and here's our proof that we can do it. And so, I would like to leave the community knowing that we work very hard and diligently to ensure that our program is reputable and that the work that we're doing is meaningful behind the scenes to support this recreation long term.
That's awesome. I love that sentiment.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. Yeah, it's great that, Scott rides as well. There are so many of the people at Division that do get out one way or the other, whether it's on a quad or a bike or a side-by-side. Our people are out there all the time, and it makes a big difference in talking to the community because we've been on the trail. We know what they're seeing, and we know what it looks like. So.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I absolutely agree with that. And one of the things that I've been afforded an opportunity to do with my time with Parks has been to become a certified instructor for dirt bikes, ATVs, ROVs, and that's another additional level of perspective that you gain when you're instructing. And so I also like to offer those opportunities to my staff, so they get trained, so they can bring that same level of perspective, the enjoyment that comes with riding an OHV or driving an OHV. Doing that recreation. I think that's critical in our work, so that there's a connection between what we're doing on the ground versus what we're doing for our job.
Yeah, definitely. I know, Paul, you're an instructor as well.
Yep.
And I'm an instructor with Rova and side by sides. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually a really key piece.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
It is.
Well,
It is. Yeah, it's an opportunity to stress the safety aspect of it, and then you can also work in some of the things that I do for my work, like the environmental components. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Kevin.
While
Definitely.
you're talking about training, we might as well just mention that the public can take free training classes for motorcycles, for quads, ATVs, and for side-by-sides in a variety of different locations in California.
All across the state. Yeah.
All across the state.
That's
They
right.
just need to sign up for those classes.
where can they find those classes?
They could start at the SVIA website. That's a great place to begin. Or they can go to the, the Outdoor Recreation Foundation.org website. Either one of those will get them to a point where they can sign up for a free training class. And there's probably one in your part of California at some point here in the next few months.
Yeah, definitely. Keep an eye out for those. I know that a lot of our OHV staff, both here at Division and at the parks, are involved with that kind of stuff.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
you're likely to run into one of us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today, Scott. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to talk for a few. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
See ya.
See ya.
Take care, guys.
Next, we have Amy Woodhall with us today. Can you introduce yourself and kind of what you do here at OHMVR Division?
Hi, I'm Amy Woodhall. I am with the Administrative Services Unit with OHV Division. We handle day-to-day operations. We do contract management for services and goods, procurement, which would be purchasing of any type of goods that we may need for our SVRAs or headquarters. We do budget and compliance. We also manage the winter recreation program, which encompasses our snow parks and OSV trails, asset management, and then, of course, we are a liaison with California HR department, handling all of our employees' needs as far as benefits, payroll, and any other support they may need.
So generally, what is admin's role within the OHMVR Division? What are you guys doing that kind of affects the OHV community?
Yeah. So as an administrative analyst, we basically support day-to-day operations, both with headquarters and of the SVRAs in the field. anything that they may need as far as support, which again would encompass purchasing, contract management, budgets, allocation of dollars.
So when we're talking about budgets and an allocation of dollars, really what you guys are doing is managing that trust fund to make sure that what's being spent is being spent correctly.
Correct.
Okay,
Compliance, transparency, and managing the trust fund.
gotcha. So there's kind of the two different aspects of the trust fund. You've got the grant side going out, which is Paul, and then you've got kind of what's being spent of it on just division itself, and that's what you guys are managing.
Correct.
Okay. So personally, what are you going out and doing off-highway vehicle wise? I know that you ride. I just don't know what.
I do ride. My husband has been riding all of his life, so obviously he got myself and our 2 boys into it. He rides a dirt bike as well as my 2 sons, and I am still on a quad at this point. But
Hey, you have handlebars. That's all that matters.
I have handlebars, the wind in my face. It's a great time. I actually have started riding my kids' dirt bikes because they're older, so I can actually stand on them and use those. So hopefully going to get my motorcycle license here quickly and keep going. I love the dirt. We love being outdoors. My favorite SBRA is Prairie City. We're close to that, so we're probably out there 1 week in a month. Hollister Hills, and then we actually do a lot of riding in Oregon and Nevada as well. So
I mean, that's kind of a common theme, I think, here in California, is that we are so close to all these off-highway vehicle recreation areas. It's not just within our state, but, you know, especially for those of us who are here in Sacramento, it's so easy to get over to Nevada. I know the folks who are up in Northern California, like Redding and places like that, it's really easy to get up into Oregon. And so, you know, we do have a lot of crossover here within the state. It's not just kind of just within California. And I know, Paul, you go out and go to other states too, yeah?
Yeah, I ride all over. I spent a lot of time in Nevada training for Baja races, but yeah, I like it all. Yeah, I like it all.
Yeah. He was, I think, a couple weeks ago, you're telling me that you just rode from your back door all the way to Nevada without touching pavement, right?
I can go from Grass Valley, crossing highways with the plated bike, but still staying on dirt. I can go all the way to like Cedarville, and from there you can get into Oregon. I mean, I do 800-mile weekends sometimes just to train for these long-distance races. But yeah, it's endless out there, you guys. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Amy. I really appreciate you talking about what admin does here at Division and your role within all of that. So I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We're now going to move on to our community connections. This is a part of the podcast where in the future here, we hope for you, the community, to actually reach out to us and ask us questions about off-highway vehicle use in California for us to answer. Today, we have a couple of questions that I dug up through social media, usual questions that we get all the time at outreach events, things like that. And I thought might be a good general question answer session for everybody. But in the future, we hope to have you send in questions, and I'll let you know at the end of this segment how you can go about doing that. Our first question today I actually pulled off of an Instagram post from a couple of months ago where I asked people to reach out to us with questions, and this was a really common one, so I wanted to ask it here to the people at the table today.
The $50 million question that everybody asks.
Yep. So our first question that we have here today is, I have a 2021 red sticker bike that I just paid for new registration on through 2026. Will I have to pay for a new sticker on January 1st?
The very short answer is going to be yes, because that 2021 bike will be sort of grandfathered in to the green sticker program. So as you might know, the bikes from 2003 through 2021, the competition bikes are considered a red sticker type of bike if they have a certain check digit in the VIN, and they're only able to ride those during competition events or at certain times of the year in different parts of California, usually for a 6-month period of time. After January 1st, 2025, this coming January 1st, if it is a vehicle that is within those model years of 2003 and 2021, they will be grandfathered into the program, the green sticker program. Now, we're assuming that this question from this person, if they paid through 2026, at that point, then the DMV will issue a green sticker to them the next time that they pay their registration. Now, the DMV hasn't come out and said, this is exactly what we're going to do. In fact, they haven't really given us much guidance as to how that's going to look after January 1st, 2025. But if it's paid through that point, they're going to be grandfathered in.
Yeah, no, they haven't given us a lot of guidance. I would assume that they would also send out a green sticker. They could also just decide that you'll get a green sticker when you re-register again in 2026, and your red sticker will act as a green sticker
Exactly,
up
but
to
they
that
just,
point.
They
But
haven't given us any guidance.
yeah, we just don't know right now. So
And we've been asking, but nobody's made that decision yet. So we'll just
Yeah.
have to see how this all kind of plays out.
and we're definitely going to keep you updated on this podcast as to how all of that continues to play out. OHMVR division is often the mouthpiece for this kind of news, but not often the people we don't actually make any of these regulatory decisions.
No, not at all.
So
Not at all. No.
that is not our role. We're just kind of the messenger. So we're doing our best to get all the information that we can and make it as clear as possible for everybody. And I think that's kind of the best answer that we have for right now is that
Yeah.
Competition bikes 2021 and older
Mm-hmm.
will be grandfathered into the green sticker system. The ones newer than that
Will not.
will not. And if you paid for your registration in 2024 and it's good through 2026, you'll get a green sticker eventually here.
We assume.
We assume.
And so what that means in layman terms for the rider, they're going to be able to ride that red sticker bike now year round.
Year round.
Yes.
So
it'll-
that's like a win
yeah.
for some people. So there's some good that come of this.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because if you have that 2003 to 2021 red sticker bike, you now have free reign year round for off-highway vehicle riding. You're no longer just limited to competitions or that very limited riding season.
Yeah. Now, the newer competition bikes can still be ridden on closed courses, for specific competitions, but they're not allowed on public lands.
Yeah.
And that's what we're always talking about when we talk about green sticker or any kind of registration. We're talking about operation on public lands.
Yeah, so if you're riding on your own private property and you're only riding on your own private property,
Or at private competitions.
yeah,
Or closed course competition
Yes.
on public lands as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Closed course Thanks.
Yeah.
You. Yeah.
yeah. In that case, you are not needing to worry about whether or not your bike is green sticker or red sticker compliant or
Right.
whatever else.
And
You
what
just-
I've noticed at races I've been to, the land manager will be there. They're wanting to see on those newer bikes some proof of ownership.
Yeah.
For you and a spark arrestor to
Yep.
go ahead and race on that closed course competition.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who has been here today to help us record. Amy, Scott, Don, Sarah, Paul, all of you. I really appreciate it. We will be coming back to you again next month with an episode all about fire here in California and how it affects off-highway vehicle recreation use. And for now, this has been the Beyond the Blacktop podcast.